freedom business, one that you can leverage yourself and maybe move into other areas or just move into a larger scale. And as you know, for the last 2 years, we've been talking to you a lot about structure, organisational structure and systems that enable you to actually not be necessarily, if you don't want to be, the primary driver of your business. And it gives me absolutely a great pleasure to welcome today Mike Cameron, who's the General Manager of Cheltenham Farms, and also Duncan Burt, who's the Manager of Cropping. Both of them, as you can understand, I guess as you go, as Mike goes through his presentation, you'll understand, are incredibly busy guys. But it's a fantastic demonstration of how a successful corporate farming structure is put together, how it works. And I think you'll find as you go through, just think about all of the things that we've been teaching you about and exposing you to over the last 2 years, and just see how they're all encapsulated in what's going on this property. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome Mike and hand over the floor to you for the next hour or so.
Thanks very much for inviting me, Greg and Andrew. This isn't really my skill set, speaking in front of lots of people. And I'm sure there's lots of people here that are better equipped as far as their actual on-farm performance. What I was hoping to do today is to give you guys a picture of what a corporate farm, how it operates, and some of the management structures that we put into place, and how we go about trying to achieve our goals and objectives. So just a quick background, we were formed in 2008. My employer is Julian Walter. He has a construction company in WA called the JWH Group. They have about a $400 million turnover and have about 2,000 staff. And so we had a bit of a building surge in the 2000s, and some of that funds was actually put towards agricultural land as a way of kind of managing risk, because at that stage there was a lot of concern around what was going to happen with bank defaults and the like. So putting it into real estate or land was Julian's way of moving forward. So there was an amalgamation of 14 farms that were in 2 key locations. So we've got Donnybrook, which is not too far from Sam. That's about 1,000 mil rainfall, and that's quite a small holding, and that's more probably a capital appreciation land growth rather than an operational return on capital type position. And then the main farm is out at Kojonup, which is probably 250 k's east and about 150 k's north of the coastline, if that makes sense, in Western Australia. So we're halfway between Kojonup and Frankland is where the property lies, in I guess a locale called Ryan's Brook. So we have 10 to 12,000 hectares in operation, and that depends on lease. We have 35,000 ewes and lambs, between 4,000 and 5,000 hectares of crop, and we have an 800 head Angus seed stock operation. So the level of crop has actually been coming down lately as a way of managing risk, and our merino component has been increasing. Probably just adding on what Andrew was saying previously, that Julian's skill set is probably similar to what Richard Branson's is, in that he doesn't claim to be a Richard Branson, but he tends to have a number of businesses. His skill set and what he believes his skill set is actually finding people that he can put in managerial operations, and he steps back. He gives them a lot of opportunity to make their own decisions, also to stuff up, but he stands back from an appropriate distance to be able to still have a strategic input and still feed information, because obviously he's had a lot of experience and is just a great resource to go to. So I'm in a privileged position in that regard to be able to tap into that resource, but it's very similar to what Andrew was mentioning at the start with that, I guess, description, where you have a entrepreneurial, then you've got the investor, owner, manager. So in this instance, and probably what's going to be most applicable for you guys, is that if there's anyone who's looking at taking more an absentee ownership point of view, so stepping back a little bit more, Julian is in effect that position, and I am the manager for the business. So I'm not sure if you guys can see what the farm performance has been, but for 2016, there was just over $2.07 million income, and that's earnings before interest and tax, which translates to about a $318 per effective hectare earnings before interest and tax. These numbers here, they're not funny numbers, they're exactly the same numbers that you guys would compile. So I think sometimes the corporate can get a little bit, how should we say, a little bit tricky with the way they report things. Rather than give you a straight up position, they're able to hide a lot of things through tax and write-downs and the like. So this is basically how it is. I guess I'd just like to maybe have a little bit of time on the differences between corporate. Now, Julian likes to see his farm as a large family farm. So from a corporate point of view, I guess the definition really is just having an external source of funding that is separate to the actual operation in itself. So just going through some of those, you probably think, what's the silly little clown doing? He's got the same things for strengths as he has for weaknesses for some of them. But I think they are. Like, if you look at access to capital, there's a lot of corporate farms that can come in and go, look at me, I'm a hero, I'm going to come in and buy 20,000 hectares and check me out, I'm amazing. And 5 years later, they've sold up and they've moved on again. However, having access to capital can be a really handy asset. Then you've got economy of scale. So I guess going on what I just mentioned with regards to coming in and having big lumps of land, I think you get to a point where you can actually have diseconomy of scale, where you've bought too much land, you've overcommitted, and then what was going to be a useful and most efficient land holding actually starts to work against you. I think that's particularly applicable in our area. So if you come in there and you buy, say, 30,000 hectares in one location and you crop the whole lot, you're going to be asking for a lot of trouble. Primarily because it can be too wet. You have a very limited window to sow, and that kind of provides extra issues. The organisational structure can be a strength, but it can also be a weakness. So in a typical corporate farm, it can be top heavy, so you can have too much managerial. You can have board of directors, you can have a lot of people that are above those who are actually on the ground doing the work. And I think sometimes that can actually really work against you. Julian has a policy that he says he likes to have a committee of one. And that actually makes a big difference to the way that we get to operate. So when I communicate with Julian with regards to business decisions or investment decisions, people say, yep, whatever you think. It's scary because he's giving you rope to do that. But I think going on again, what Andrew was saying is that a good owner is actually able to empower and trust the people that he's putting in place, because if he's done the work selecting the right people, he can then trust them to take that job. I think sometimes there can be a lack of emotion with corporate farming, so and that's a big difference, I think, between the family and the corporate. So the family farm is out there at 11 o'clock at night when there's a front coming through. You've got to feed that mob of ewes so that you don't lose a heap overnight. Whereas I think sometimes the corporate farm has got an image of, oh, it's not my farm. I'll deal with it. I'll deal with it on Monday. And so I think that's probably one of the most significant differences between the two. So most of my time's actually spent analysing family businesses like your own, trying to work out how does it work and how can I best replicate that in our system with the constraints that I have. So I need to employ people that don't have the same tie to a farm or skin in the game, as I've referred up there, than what some family members do. So part of that is actually trying to find people who really are tied to the business and that emotionally it does bother them. Like I've got our cropping manager here at the moment and it really bothers him if he's got a poor result with some of his yields or there's weeds there that he's struggling to get control of. And I love that about the guys that I have, is that it will bother them if the results aren't right. So going to the family side of things, I guess we've covered some of that. So I think the family is excellent at running a lean cost of production. I think from I put down there a weakness being a complete cost focus can limit efficiency. Now that's not saying that every family farm is just all about cost, but I think, pardon me, sometimes you can be a little bit focused on cost to a point that actually you miss opportunities with efficiency, and it's a delicate balance. I think we're always looking at that input-output balance. I guess an example of that would be, say, sheep feeders or sheep feeding. So probably probably maybe 10, 20 years ago, we'd be running around with trucks and bags feeding sheep. And then someone came up with a bright idea of running a sheep feeding trailer. Now, I would have thought that there would have been some limited access originally because it would have been a high upfront capital cost to get into. But then it's become pretty much, I would have thought most families now that are running sheep would be running at least one sheep feeder and probably there's some pretty flash ones getting out there now which are offering all different sorts of abilities to weigh samples and all the rest of it's been going out. So I guess that's an example where a straight cost focus rather than cost per unit can sometimes be a weakness. And then I've put appropriate valuing on time. So again, this kind of comes back to what position are you trying to take with what Andrew was saying there. So if you're trying to take all 4 positions, so you're trying to be the employee, the owner, the manager, if you're trying to do all those positions, there's aspects that you're not really valuing your time as well as it could be. Now I'm not trying to tell you guys how to do it or anything like that. It's more that I think it's just a common thing that I've got to drench the sheep, so I'm drenching the sheep. I've got to go and bring that mob in, so I'm doing it. But if there's an ability in your business to be able to say, well, I'm taking some of the higher managerial decisions, and most of my time I'm valuing it, say, $150 to $200 an hour, then I can actually afford someone to pay $20 an hour to go and bring that mob of sheep in or drench them. So I guess there's a degree of scale that needs to come into it. So this is basically our core values. They're my 3 little monkeys. So the core values, we've got family values, integrity, to be open and honest, working together and taking responsibility. This is the corporate culture that Julian has established. So we have an odd culture. I've always believed there's good in people and people will treat others as they like to be treated. So we created a unique spot in the industry, a company where people can feel safe, can grow, learn and enjoy their work. We give people plenty of rope or opportunity to excel, and hopefully we have a damn good time doing it. I've focused on the financial goals. So obviously there is other goals that I can put here, but it'll be a little bit too elaborate. So if you're happy enough, I'm just going to focus on the financial goals for today. So the financial goals for us, they tend to be a little bit more general in description. So we aim to be profitable. We want to be in the top 25% long term. We want to be sustainable, so we don't want to be here for 5 minutes and out again. Julian has kind of given us a lot of confidence because he said that it'll be his children's decision to sell the farm, which I think as a manager and as our crew, it's good having that security to know that we can put some longer term decisions in place. And we want to fund the operation independent of JWH. So without going into too much detail, JWH is in effect the bank for us. So they create, or they fund our cash flow requirements. In effect, like a seasonal overdraft, if you like. So the financial objectives that we have, these are more specific and they're measurable. So we want to have an earnings before interest and tax of $300 per effective hectare. And we want to have a return on capital or return on assets managed of between 3 to 5% operational, and longer term having a capital growth of 3 or 5%. So capital growth being land value and operational being the actual running of the farm. So a combination long term of between 6 to 10%. I think 10%, well, between 6 to 10%, I think that sits pretty reasonable compared to some share market long term. I'm not saying it's going to be as high as what some of that can be, but it's from an overall portfolio point of view, it's a lower risk investment. So how have we tried to achieve the objectives at Sherrilton Farm? Through benchmarking, profit drivers, determining key performance indicators. We've established clear and measurable key performance indicators through budgeting, accountability in the organisational structure, and finally investment. So the benchmarking side of things, I think most people that are probably in this group are doing benchmarking. Is that correct, Greg? Yep. So I think straight up, I think that sets you apart from the rest of the industry. I think that makes a huge difference because you're actually allowing someone else to come into your business and say, you need to justify that decision. And I think there's probably a bit of insecurity that kind of takes place with that, but it's a really healthy position to be in, where you're allowing someone else to come in and say, well, why are you running at 8 DSE per hectare when we've got guys that are running at 16 DSE per hectare? And I think it just is a great way to go through those profit drivers with your consultants and then work out how you can set up key performance indicators that in combination allow you to meet your objectives. Does that make sense? Yep. So I've just put down there a list of the consultants that we use. So we've got Plan Farm in WA. They do our grain and we also use them for some of our grain marketing. We've just started using Greg this last year. The Angus side of things is probably a hole in our business. We're currently doing that internally and we need to look at doing that better. Financial, we use Plan Farm and also Cooper Partners. I think it's really important, I'll put down the bottom there, to develop clear benchmark targets, these KPIs, and ensure they are measurable and repeatable. I think one of the common themes that's come out today with both what Doug, what Sam, and some of what Greg's already mentioned is that it has to be measurable. We have to be able to go back to those objectives and say, have we achieved our objectives? And if not, why haven't we been able to? And I think that's where the key performance indicators in combination allow us to see whether we've hit our objectives. I think I've talked about this a little bit already, but there's the system needs to be built around profit drivers as a way of meeting those objectives. And yeah, focus on producing the least cost per unit, not necessarily always the lowest cost. And I think this is particularly applicable for lambing percentage. I think people will look at things and go, you know what, I have got amazing lambing percentage. Come and check me out. I've done 150%. And so you'll be able to get a huge amount of production. However, what is that actually costing you on a per unit basis? So have you compromised on stocking rate in order to achieve that lambing percentage? And if you have compromised on that, then what does that say on your cost per unit? With the budgeting, this is one of the things that I'm required to do as the GM for our business. I put down there it needs to be a tool for accountability, not to shut the bank up. I think too often when we set up budgets, we work on a target that is well under what we actually aim to achieve. So rather than looking at long-term averages and realistic targets. So for example, we might say let's say wool production per hectare, for budget purposes you put in 30 kilos per hectare, whereas you know your long-term averages are going to be, say, 45 or 50 kilos. I think what I'd like to kind of bring forward with the budgeting is that if you use it I guess as a means of measuring your performance and setting up targets, I think that's where its biggest strength is. I think if you set the targets, then you can make your adjustments as you're going through the season. So I'll put down there, we need a clear focus on budget to actuals throughout the year, so they need to be measurable. What I do is I actually compare our budget to actuals on a monthly basis. So I'll get an AgriMaster report that's sent through from our accountant. We'll go through it, and if there's big holes in it, so we're trending in a certain direction, then we'll start to make some adjustments. I mentioned there about budget to likely outcome, and that budget's not a break-even target. I'll go into it in a little bit of detail in the next slide. But key managers are responsible for budget to actuals within their own sphere. So we have coded items in AgriMaster, which I guess a lot of you guys will be familiar with your own accounting, that refer to particular areas. So with our livestock manager, we've got an animal health line item. And so he's actually responsible for his budget to actuals in that particular area. For Dunk on chemical use, if he's suddenly got a massive blowout on his chemicals, then he'll actually need to justify why he's actually spending that. So we've just come back from WA and we're looking at putting another fungicide over the barley now. He's actually kind of wrestling, do I put it on, do I not put it on? And again, it comes back to those targets that we're setting and also that input-output relationship. So yeah, I can afford to put that fungicide on. It's going to cost me $30 a hectare, but I'm able to achieve another $70 of yield potential. So this is the operational structure that we currently have, and I've tried to put CEO or absentee owner as a reference to those here that are looking at taking that position. So the GM is myself. We have accounts or payroll that you can see by the arrow that is accountable to myself. Then we've got the workshop manager, cropping manager, livestock and 2IC. So hopefully it's not too confusing, but if we work down from the top, the absentee owner and myself deal with most of the main structural and investment decisions. And my job is to report back to him on a regular basis on how things are tracking, so that he knows, I guess, primarily if he's going to have to require some more funding if things are getting poor. And also just to know a clear picture of how we're performing. Then under myself, we've got a livestock and 2RC. The reason why he's also the 2RC is that I think it's really important to build into the business having someone who is able to take your role if you're no longer able to be there for whatever reason. So I've got to go on holidays. I can't just disappear and just hope that everything just takes care of itself. So we've nominated someone who is our 2RC. So he will then come up to the GM position, if that makes sense. I put in there that those arrows refer to the farmhands below. So with the livestock operation, I think some of you have seen the video with us weaning. So part of that is that we will wean 35,000 ewes and lambs in a week. It actually ends up being about 3 days. So what we do is by giving the livestock manager access to all those farmhands, he's able to delegate from that pool of staff to the area that at that timing is most important. So when Duncan's harvesting, he'll then access some of those farmhands that were available for weaning. And the workshop manager will have access to some of those farmhands when he is preparing seeding gear. What we've tried to do is have it set up so that the managers coordinate with me on a regular basis to outline the things that are most important to get done. So it's tricky through harvest because we'll be just coming up to weaning and marketing lambs at the same time as wanting to be harvesting, at the same time as wanting to be weaning cattle. And so that's where I will liaise with our managers and work out which staff members we need to allocate for what jobs. So this is just a little bit of detail about how things work with me. I may have already covered some of these. The GM has been given full autonomy, so I basically get a whole heap of rope, just enough to hang myself. The GM is responsible for planning, whole of farm integration, establishment of budgets with consultants and regular budget to actual analysis. So I'm also responsible for the hiring and firing, but part of going through this process is actually really healthy for our business because it kind of highlighted a few areas that we actually need to look at internally. And one of them is actually the hiring and firing, because if I have got managers that are dealing with farmhands on a regular basis and they're finding issues with those particular staff members, then for me to kind of step in externally from the day-to-day operation is probably not actually a really healthy thing. So we're actually going through just looking at some of that at the moment. So Dunk, you might have to start firing some people. GM liaises with the sub-managers. So we kind of outlined that in the previous slide. In the end, I'm ultimately responsible for achieving or failing to achieve the objectives and goals. So while there is aspects further down the chain of hitting key performance indicators for those sub-managers, if I don't achieve my objectives and goals, that's on me. And I've just put down there that I negotiate the key purchasing contracts. So they're the large items. So we spend about $900,000 a year on fertiliser, and so that is one of the contracts that I work through. Some of the animal health budget items we work through so we can get some purchasing power through scale, and footy tickets, which is really important. So we've got here, this is specifically to the managers or the second line in the organisational structure. So I put down there, the managers are responsible for day-to-day operations and staffing for key periods where clear communication to the GM is required. And I've just put down there the contractors. So when we're looking at that pool of staff that was below, that were farmhands, there's also contractors that can come in for key periods. So with land marking, for example, we bring the ewes in, we drench based on fecal egg counts, we will wet and dry the ewes, we'll run them through the electrodip, and we'll also mark the lambs. So they'll only come in once and they won't come back in again until weaning time. And part of that is that we just don't want to be continually handling mobs and taking up the extra time. But also in that we use contractors to help us to achieve those particular goals. If we try and do it all by ourselves, we'll kill ourselves, and it's more kind of a tactical decision, if you like. Put down there that managers are able to order within the guidelines of an established budget. So we did actually used to run purchase orders. Just got really complicated and tedious for everyone. So what I've actually done is I've asked those key merchandise suppliers for us to send me a copy of the invoice or the email at point of sale, so that when Dunk spends like 50,000 on chemical, and I'm like, what are you doing spending that? It allows that kind of link up, and then we can have a quick discussion and know, okay, well that makes sense, go for it. But it also means that I'm allowing them to make more of those decisions that they need to do. Otherwise, it can get to a position where I just micromanage everything, and that's no good for me, and it's no good for them because they're just constantly sick of me hovering over the top of them. I've just mentioned there that while on the previous slide I'm accountable for hitting the objectives and goals, the managers are responsible for hitting the KPIs and budget targets for their particular areas. This is for the farmhand. So with our particular business, we need farmhands that are flexible, because one day they might be doing drenching ewes, the next day they might be spraying, the day after that they might be jumping on the harvester. So they do need to have a range of skills for the way that we work it, but that allows us to kind of smooth out the labour curve. So rather than us having seasonal labour, we tend to have staff that we can run throughout the whole year, and that works well for us because we get to know the staff, they know us, and there's just a better connection to the property. And you know how we talked about the emotional attachment to the farm? I think that's really important. If you get a contractor that just kind of comes in and does his job and head off again, he's got no real attachment to the property. Whereas I think all our staff actually have an attachment to it, and I love that about them. And I've just put down there a picture of one of the guys that's just parked the ute for a little bit. And I've just put down there, Grace is required in the training phase, but which is the same for me. Like I've done every stupid thing there's possible that can be done on a farm. So, all right. So reporting. So this is where I guess the link back to manager and back to owner is really important. So I've said it needs to be clear throughout the year, up front, and don't sugarcoat it. So if I let Julian know how we're tracking, he will get it exactly as it is. So this year, for example, we didn't get any rain until the end of June. And so I was telling him that this is messed up and that the cash implications could be quite severe. So at that stage we had no canola that was up, we had a limited amount of crop that was up, cereal that was up, our stock were all being confinement fed, and so we were bleeding cash really quickly. And I could try and go, oh, no, it's all right, we'll be right. But I'd rather just be upfront and just say, look, this is where we're at. And at that stage, we were sucking big time. I've just said context is essential when reporting takes place. So with our balance sheet, we will value all the lambs at an average cost of sales. So if we're at $90 per head for our lambs, and that's across the board, but we've had a horrible season, and so all these lambs that are apparently valued at $90 are actually really only little $45 stores. I need to give context to say, well, we're valuing them at $90 on the balance sheet, but they're definitely not $90. I think that's important. Reporting must be measurable and linked to key performance indicators. This again is a big one. So I think everyone's referred to setting targets and then having measurable performance that we can kind of come back to. So when the reporting comes through, it is based on what those key performance indicators are. I'll mention some of those in a little while. So we use, and some of you guys will be using the same sources as a way of reporting. So we use AgriWeb for our sheep enterprise. We use AgriMaster for our financials. AgWorld is primarily for our cropping component. Stockbook is for our pedigree information for our Angus. And we use things like Dropbox, email, text and phone just to allow people access to certain files that they require for their particular area. And I've just put down there face-to-face, I think is really important as well. I really try to make sure that we're available as much as we can with our guys. I think we've already covered that I've got access to all that information and that I'm responsible for compiling the final data and analysis. So this is where we take our annual performance, we'll then take it to our consultants, we'll pull it apart, we'll benchmark that compared to other people, and then we will then say, okay, there's these areas here where we've missed the mark, these areas where we've done okay, and that's our way of then kind of restructuring for the next year what we need to put our emphasis on. I put down there a general info is just through a toolbox meeting, so we just get together in a workshop. Everyone grabs a chair and we just talk about what's going on with regards to the operation. And that kind of gives them a plan, it gives them an overall picture and allows them to ask questions about what's going on. So this year was a prime example of that. We've had next to no rainfall, and I'm telling the guys, keep going, we've got to keep seeding, we've got to keep seeding. They're going, why are we seeding? There's no rain. But the difference between getting the crop in on time when it finally did rain, then we were up and going. And then I've just said encourage reporting from the bottom up. So I don't think there's any, while there's an established hierarchy, there is no person who's more valuable than anyone else in the business. So we've all got particular roles in the business. So these are just some of the KPIs that we run. So a stocking rate between 13 and 15. And these are kind of developed through talking to our consultants and highlighting those profit drivers. And the key performance indicators in conjunction give us our profit drivers. So if we're looking at stocking rate plus lambing percentage, that actually gives us meaningful data. Lambing percentage in and of itself is of no importance. I've then just broken down a couple other areas there. So I think every business here will have their own KPIs that they're able to work out. And there's lots and lots of those. So even like with what Sam was saying, KPI is really those targets that we're setting. So we have also targets on soils and the like as well. So how do we go about investing in those KPIs? So I've got here staff. I've talked about replicating the family farm and having that motivation. I think it's really important to pay for every hour that's worked. And that's part of establishing that motivation that you want to replicate from the family farm. So if we are doing something at an obscene hour of the day, the guys are like, yep, let's do it. And I don't think that is established when it's like you've got a baseline salary and every extra hour you work, you're just doing it. And I think it's a really important thing. I used to work on a dairy property prior to this, and we used to do 80 to 100 hours a week, and it just kills you. And it was a really good highlight for me to make sure that the guys that I had working for me were actually paid appropriately for the efforts they put in. I put down there, find managers who delegate well and understand the impact of timeliness. So there is actually no one on our farm who is superior to anyone else, and so if the guys are away and sheep need shifting and sheep need drenching, I'm going to be doing it as well, if it's an essential thing from a timely point of view. So it's about prioritising that time. So with our livestock manager, he will delegate as best he can with the crew that he's got. But if there's still an issue there with timeliness, so I think the example of weaning and shearing, so we have that very tight and close together. If he's needing to, then that's when he'll pull in some contract labour to help. Or he will jump in there and he'll be doing some of that work as well, even if it is your $20 an hour type jobs that need to get done. I've put down, we all have unique and complementary skills if meshed together well. So we've got some crew that are really details orientated, and that's really important. We've got people that are overall and kind of whole of farm focused. That's primarily my skill set, but I'm a terrible welder. Like, everyone laughs at how awesome my welding skills is. Basically looks like a bird's crapped on it when I'm doing my welding. But the thing is that's okay. Like, there's other guys that are fantastic in the farm at doing it. So I think it's knowing what you're good at and letting other people that are better than you do it, and that's okay. I'll just put down there just, I think in our current environment, the safety induction is really essential. I think it's just something we have to do and we kind of want to do. The investment in efficiency. So as we mentioned before, all the investment decisions have to be based on how we support those key performance indicators, which is a way of helping us to achieve our objectives and goals. So by us putting laneways in, we're able to shift mobs of 6,000 or 7,000 at a time with one labour unit and a dog. We've got 200 paddocks across the farm, and of those, so when we're weaning, about half the farm will have stock. So you're looking at, and generally those paddocks are smaller, so you might have 100 paddocks that have stock in them. And so we need to muster 100 paddocks in 3 days. So what we do is we go in there with some bikes, we open the gates, and everything comes in like a station. And they all run through the yards. Now, if we were to run it as a more traditional way, we would bring in one mob from a paddock that's, say, 5 k's away. We would we would process them, send them out, send another labour unit to go to the next paddock right next door, bring them all in. And so there's huge cost savings from a labour point of view. So if we're looking at that input-output relationship again, this is a way of reducing the amount of time taken, giving us a lower cost base per unit produced. Yard stock handling equipment. We've got yards set up in key locations, and then we've got the handling equipment that allows us to get some efficiency. So run a VE machine, electro-dip, auto weigh scales, but we don't want to go silly and just have everything latest and greatest, because I don't think you have to. It's just about trying to get the job done efficiently and still cost effectively. We run chaff carts, so it allows us to have a cheaper cost of production through summer, less feed costs, less staff. Run pinpoint, which is a, oh, sorry?
Sorry, just for the chaff carts.
Mm-hmm.
Have you got a special way of getting the chaff carts from where you're cropping to the paddocks where the sheep are? Or do you just run the sheep wherever you're cropping?
Yeah. So the way we work it is that we're getting to a point where we finish weaning, then we shear, and then as soon as they're finished shorn, they go straight on to chaff carts, because we actually want them to, or chaff piles, because we actually want them to smash those piles hard so that we can crop it again the following year. And as soon as the wool goes off, their demands are through the roof, and so that's when they're really trying to hit it hard. So we get condition on their backs quickly, and they get best utilisation out of those chaff piles quickly. Yep. I'll put pinpoint in there. That's just individual nozzle shut off as opposed to boom shut off. So we spend about $350,000 a year on chemical, and with the traditional boom section control, compared to pinpoint, we'll end up spraying an extra 20% of the paddock because of the arabilities. So that saves us $70,000 a year just on chemical. And we also run Flexi-N over some of our crops and our pastures as well. So there's an additional saving from that point as well. So it's just, again, that input-output relationship. And that's what all these investments need to be focused on. We've got a nurse truck there for just getting efficient spraying. Land use fencing is a big one for us. We put 50 k's of fencing in, quite a big expense. We paid for it the next year. So we had 30% of the program that was too wet, that had been strategically fenced out the year before. That, if you take a whole of paddock analysis and you go, well, that paddock did 2 tonne canola, I'm pretty happy about that, you walk away. But we were observing the yield monitors, and the yield monitors were saying, in the best stuff, you're doing over 3 tonne, in the worst stuff, you're doing about 0.2. So we took that 30% of the paddock out, we sowed it down to Balanza, which was carefully advised to us by Sam, and it still grew, which is amazing. And so the crop ended up performing quite well because it was a really wet year. The good stuff performed well, and the pasture ended up being our highest production areas in the farm, which is, it was kind of good validation for that investment. So I was just, again, prioritising that spend. So we've got software down there, which is just, again, for efficiency. So we will use AgWorld, particularly on our cropping. That allows work orders to be established. Everyone's synced to the same system, and you can put your or your application, and then you're sorted for things like quality assurance as well. And I'll just put down their scaling of enterprise. So each of the enterprises need to be efficient in and of themselves. So we don't want to have a cropping component that is 90% of the farm for our particular area, because we don't think that gives us best bang for our buck. So we've set it up so that we've got an Angus operation that in and of itself, as a family farm, would still justify itself. Livestock enterprise, so we've got a composite system and a merino system that in and of themselves would justify from a personal family farm, from a scale point of view. And then we run a cropping enterprise, which is really what we believe is two scalable units. So we talk 2,000 hectares as being what requires a seeder and a spray unit. So we get some, we run a big spraying unit across both of those, but that seems to be the sweet spot for our area, to have those enterprises at that scale. I think this has been really well covered already, so I probably can let this go. The only thing I would say is that we do run high P for cereal, low for canola and lowest for stock. And that's just the way that we built the system, so that we can prioritise spend and risk manage the overall business. So we treat our sheep as our baseline for cash flow, so that gives us support from the ground up, reliable and consistent. We have canola, which is the other extreme, which is highly irregular, but can be very profitable when it all comes through. I think lime's been covered off. The law of minimum, same thing that Doug carried through there as well. We've put down ensure no serious limitations for just those particular nutrients. I know there's other ones, and we probably should put a bit more work into those. We do that through our cropping mix, because we feel that that's our biggest risk item, and so we do put trace right through that, and that's on units that are likely to be removed from that targeted yield that we've put in place. And we just run a retained stubble system. So here's some of Sam's guidance. So he's actually pretty good. We've got the clovers there, and that's a nursery crop where the ute's currently parked. And that's there for harvesting I think we did about a tonne to the hectare of Balanza and Turbo Persian. And then that was, so I got 30 tonne off that paddock, and that was then spread out over 3,000 hectares to then give us the production that you see in those paddocks where the ewes are. I've just put down pasture on a seed, pasture seed per kilo on a cost point of view. So we're able to take, that was sown at 10 kilos per hectare, so that nursery crop cost us about $30 in actual seed, and it generated $3,000 worth of seed. We made use of the same gear that we run through our cropping program, so the headers and sprayers and all the rest of it are used there. I've just made a mention there, going on with what Doug and Sam were saying, is that just target those particular areas that you're going to get best bang for your buck. So I don't think we want every single, well, we probably do want every single hectare to be productive, but I think in some ways us prioritising our spend is probably a better way of doing it than saying I'm just going to get every single hectare up to high production. And we've just put down target livestock type and land use. So ryegrass focused on the cattle program, and we want as many legumes in our prime lamb and merino operation because we want protein for a late drop lambing flock. Some genetics. Again, it just comes back to on a per unit cost. We want to have it as tightly linked to our commercial flock, so we put effort into the production of good genetics that are through breed plan. We're actually working with Greg at the moment, just trying to get that set up. We've been a little bit industrial with the way that we've done it. We've used high indexing size, but we haven't gone through the process of really tightening it up on a ewe nucleus point of view. I think it's important that wherever the genetics are used, that they're set up in an optimum level. So with growth rate, we can get animals that, I think in the merino side of things, we can get merinos that can actually grow really well. But does that compromise your stocking rate? And so I think some of those questions are the ones that we need to ask. These are the ones that I really enjoy. So they're the enterprise synergies, and they're the free kicks that we get between the enterprises. So the chaff heaps for the sheep, high legume pastures that go into the crop production, the risk spread between the enterprises. We do get frost and it can really smash us, and so that's why we pull back from a higher, we were a 70% cropping program and we pulled back to 50-50 now, livestock and cropping. And then the consistency of returns. So we don't want to have, probably the best way to illustrate this is if we're all running merino enterprises and we're running all ewes mated to crossbred, and we have an absolute shocking year, you look like a clown. The next year, if it's an absolutely fantastic year, you'll probably go to top 10% production. And so what we're trying to suggest is have aim for the less extreme, so have a weather portion in the merino flock as opposed to just all breeding ewes. And that's not saying that those that are running all breeding ewes are doing it wrong. It's just that there is a high risk component if you all chase top end production every time. I've mentioned about the staff movement within the enterprises and also the machinery, how we kind of shift the machinery between the enterprises. So achieving consistency. Communication, understand clearly where the business is at any point in time and make appropriate adjustments in a timely manner. That really comes down to myself and the guys that are our managers below. It's about taking those KPIs, seeing where we're at, seeing our measured performance and going, okay, we need to make some adjustments. So if, for example, my livestock manager has a really bad scanning, then he needs to communicate with me, look, scanning's off. In order for us to achieve our stocking rate, we're going to have to put another 2 paddocks of canola in, or something along those lines. I mentioned about the top 10% is difficult to achieve. maybe lower the risk and increase the consistency. So tying it all together, this is the last slide. So I put down there to establish long-term business goals. I think that's really important. To have clear objectives linked tightly to business goals. So they're the measurable ones that we can actually see how we're tracking. KPIs help track performance in line with the business objectives. Clear communication and information flow is essential, so you know where you're tracking. The final point there, I think, is really important. I think employ quality people and look after them. They'll be the ones that actually drive your business in your absence. Any questions?
We've just got time for a couple of questions now, guys. And tomorrow after lunch, there's a big panel discussion. There's plenty of time for a panel discussion. So we'll get through a couple of questions here now, and then Mike and Duncan will be here tomorrow to answer the rest of them as well.
Sorry about that, I did rabbit on a bit. Sorry about that, I did rabbit on a bit.
That's fine.
Yep.
That's perfect. So we'll just take the three that their hands up.
How do you get your workers to have skin in the game? Like, what incentives do you give them? Like production goals, or what do you do?
Yeah, so I think the payment for every hour that they work, I think, is really important. My three managers actually had no previous ag experience. So Duncan had some experience, but all came from farms or from families that weren't in broadacre agriculture. So we're trying to inspire them with their roles. So you kind of empower them through giving them more responsibility. We haven't got things where we like I'll give staff bonuses based on performance. So I'll go through there and I'll actually say, you've well and truly exceeded your KPIs. Here's either a cash bonus, or I sent Dunk up to Exmouth to go fishing, or just things like that. That I think it shows guys that they have a huge impact on the final bottom line. So, like, Dunk didn't catch any fish, by the way. But I think it just gives it shows the guys that they're valued, and that we understand that if you get a muppet and they do a really poor job, it's seriously going to cost you. So it's not unusual to have a spray operator that goes out to a paddock and says, "Oh, I wasn't supposed to put that SU in there. Sorry about that. I've just gone and covered 100 hectares and there goes all that canola." I think we've all had those stories of stuff like that going on. Dunk's never done that in 10 years, and that's not to say you'll never do it, Dunk, but that's the thing, is that he really values that, and he knows that he's important to the farm business. Does that make sense? Yep.
I just want to say congratulations, beautiful business model, and you're executing it well. Just my question is, how did Julian find you, and why are you still there?
Hey? It's a funny story actually where we started. I'll probably gas bag a bit about it, but when I first graduated from USC, I went down to a dairy operation. I started managing that, and then I wanted to get a bit more scale because my family was getting a bit bigger. Julian had an advertisement in the paper saying 6-900, and I thought 6,900 hectares, that sounds really good. I went and caught up with him, and it was 600 to 900 hectares and in Donnybrook. And so at that stage, he'd only bought 300. He was hoping to get to 600. So I went around and did the meeting with him. I said, "I don't think you can actually afford to hire me," because I couldn't justify my expense for that process. And Julian's approach was, you get it right with the system and I'll continue to expand it. So that's been his philosophy, I guess. Yep. And with regards to, was a question whether I'd stay on? Or I'm still there. I love the diversity, I love the challenge. I'll be honest with you that there's times where I kind of go, what am I doing? And I think my wife thinks that sometimes as well. But it's a unique opportunity, and I think we can always look at things being greener on the other side because of whatever job we're in at the time. But I think that for me, I think kind of fertilise the pasture that you're on, if you know what I mean. So that's my philosophy, I guess, with that.
Yeah, just with your maternal composites, what have you settled on there, Mike?
Yep. So as in breed.
Yeah.
Yep. So we've got a guy in WA called Guy Bowen. He runs a White Suffolk maternal base there, and then we've used Lamprey, Tom Bull, and what we've done is we've also gone to New Zealand and got Landcorp landmarks. So we've basically just gone on index, chased animals that we thought were going to give us good opportunities, and we've then just taken the mature size out. So we've drafted and drafted and drafted, taking off the mature size because we think that's where it really falls apart. Very, very productive on a per head basis, but on a per hectare basis, it's pretty tricky. So we found that's been the weak spot in that particular area is that if we compare them with merinos, we need to be able to achieve a similar kind of stocking rate per hectare, and then they really do perform really well. So that's our challenge, I guess.
Right. So if you were to go and buy rams, or
Yep.
where do you get your rams from?
We do that internally now, but we still access outside size that are, I guess, high index in those particular areas. Sorry, mate?
Twinning and growth rates, your own profit.
Yeah, well, see, that's one of the things we actually come right back on growth rates, because some of the work that we've seen is that, again, just chasing that optimum, is that some of the work done, I think, was the main man who set up Land Plan. Was it Dave? Who set up, did a lot of the work in the background of Land Plan? Yep. No, not Dave Pethick, sorry. One of the geneticists basically said that what's going to run out first, is it going to be feed or is it going to be the genetics? And it's actually the feed that becomes the limiting source. And so we've actually got animals that have growth targets that we actually can't achieve because we don't run them at a soft enough stocking rate to actually get that transferred, if that makes sense. So we've actually come right back on growth rate. It's still relevant in the mix, but we tend to chase a bit of positive fat, decent muscle, and we want fertility, but within, again, an optimum level. So our composite nucleus scans 235%, and the growth rates run at about 400 to 500. So our lambs at 100 days, so those lambs that we showed, where are we? Those lambs there are from that nucleus at 235%, and nothing there is over 100 days. So that's kind of our targets. Yep.